After that, everything was a blur. As quickly as we could, we prepared for battle and marched to the Fushimi Magistrate's office. There were a number of the Kyo Judiciary Commissioner's men gathered there as well, in preparations for battle with the Choshu. Walking proudly in front of the men, Kondo-san approached the government officials near the gate.
会津中将松平片森様をお預かり新選組京都守護職の要請により長谷参陣申した。
Katamori Matsudaria was the lord of the Aizu domain and also the Kyo military commissioner, which made him a very important person. His name would have been immediately recognized. The man standing near the gate looked slightly taken aback by the mention of the Shinsengumi.
要請だと。そのような連絡は届いておらん。
No, that didn't make any sense. What? Perhaps sensing my confusion, Saito-san leaned over and whispered under his breath.
内輪の情報伝達さえままならぬとは戦況によほどの混迷があると見える。
Do you mean the Choshu is overpowering the shogunate's forces?
そうとも限らん。しかし敵方に翻弄されてはいるのだろうな。
This could be tricky. The Judiciary Commissioner and the Military Commissioner had similar organizations, but they operate very differently. The Military Commissioner's office was under the jurisdiction of the Aizu domain, while the Kuwana domain controlled the Judiciary Commissioner. I didn't fully understand the relationship between each domain, but so far as I knew, the Aizu and Kuwana weren't quite fond of one another.
しかし我らには会津藩からの正式な書状がある。上の者に取り次いでいただければ。
取り継ごうとも回答は同じだ。さあ帰れ。身風呂ごときに用はないわ。
How terrible. And after they'd asked for the Shinsengumi's help, I felt Harada's hand on my shoulder and turned to look up at him.
まあ、お前が落ち込むことじゃないさ。俺たちの扱いなんざいつもこんなもんだ。
But this is so galling. I wasn't truly a member of the Shinsengumi, but even so, after living with the Shinsengumi men and watching how they worked, I couldn't bear to see how they were treated, which is why this felt wrong to me. Everyone in the Shinsengumi had worked so hard to maintain peace in Kyo. How could these people, who were supposed to be our allies, turn us away without a second thought?
ありがとうよ。だが、ここはこらえてくれ。俺らが諸次第に対して下手に騒げば、合図の顔を潰しちまうかもしれないしな。
Oh. The Kuwano would only need to complain that the Shinsengumi hadn't shown them proper respect to make trouble for the Aizu. All of the men, including Hanada, understood what needed to be done and they endured.
局長、諸次第では話になりません。奉行所を離れ、会津藩と合流してはいかがでしょうか。
Sato suggested Kondo-san was rudely interrupted by Takeda.
ここを離れるだと？戦場で軍令を無視して何とするつもりだ。局長、戦場では伝令が交錯するものです。自ら動くなど愚の骨頂。今はこの場で待機すべきものと考えます。
ここが我らに与えられた陣ならば、その話わからんでもない。だが今は我が新選組の身体に関わる問題でもある。
君は新選組の戦奉行であるこの私に向かって意見を言うつもりか？
いや、斉藤君の言うことにも一理ある。
Kondo-san nodded deeply as he glanced at Sato-san.
我が新選組はこれより守護職が設営している陣を探す。
And with that, the Shinsengumi set off to find the soldiers of the Aizu domain. Night had fallen by the time we arrived at Kujo Beach. After leaving the Fushimi Magistrate's office, we made for the Aizu Manor. Upon arriving, we relayed our previous encounter and asked for new orders. The manor official we met with directed us to go to Kujo Beach, which we did. However,
新選組が我々会津藩と共に待機だと。そんな連絡は受けていない。すまんが藩邸へ問い合わせてくれるか。
Nagakura seemed to tolerate no more of this.
あ？お前らんとこの藩邸が新選組は九条河原へ行けって言ったんだよ。その俺らを適当に扱うってのは新選組を呼びつけたお前らの上司をないがしろにする行為だって分かってんのか？
それは私に言われても。
The man flinched and shivered, then fell silent. Kono-san did his best to assure a professional air, but there was no hiding his massive grin.
陣営の責任者と話がしたい。上に取り次いでいただけますかな。
Camp time! At last. After a great deal of trouble, we were allowed to remain with the troops at Kujo Beach. The chief and the captains left the rest of us to speak with the Aizu's commanders. They returned some time after. Sometime later, looking tired and drained, Inoue, who had gone with them, also wore a bitter sort of half smile.
どうやらここの会津藩の兵たちは主戦力じゃなくただの予備兵らしい。会津藩の主だった兵たちは蛤御門の方を守っているそうだ。
They're treating the Shinsengumi like reserves?
屯所に来た伝令の話じゃ一刻を争う事態だったんじゃねえのか？
状況が動き次第即座に戦場へ馳せる。今の俺たちにできるのはそれだけだ。
So all we can do is wait. There was a chance that the call could come at night, so the men stayed awake, ready to act.
休むなら言えよ。俺の膝くらいなら貸してやる。
Ha! Ha ha! Harada. Oh, no, I'm fine. Harada laughed as I shook my head. It wouldn't be fair for me to be the one to sleep. The men had to remain alert, anticipating that they could face death at any moment. Anxiety wrapped around me until I slept near dawn. Hold on. The men, however, were vigilant through the night. Even as I drifted in and out of consciousness, I could see them nearby, persisting against the night. The break of dawn burned my eyes as I heard it. A cannon? The crack of a gunshot tore through the morning air, and in the distance I heard men shouting and the clang of metal. The fighting had begun. The captains looked at one another and nodded.
行くぞ!
I stared at him for a moment, perhaps not yet fully awake, until I understood what he was saying. Right! With a quick nod, I readied myself to go. Then...
待たんか新選組。我々は待機を命じられているのだぞ。
待てだと。
Even during our lengthy march the day before, I'd never seen Hijikata-san mad. Maybe, because of his position as commander, he was afraid to express himself when his temper flared up, but it looked as if he reached his limit. Normally, he left the yelling to Nagakura and stayed patient when speaking with army officials. This time, however, he finally had enough.
てめえらは待機するために待機してんのか？御所を守るために待機してたんじゃねえのか？長州の野郎どもが攻め込んできたら援軍に行くための待機だろうが。
しかし出動命令はまだ。
Hijikata-san was in no mood for excuses.
自分の仕事にひとかけらでも誇りがあるならてめえらも待機だうんぬん言わずに動きやがれ。
Without even waiting for a response, Hijikata-san spun around and stalked off fuming. Where are we going? I didn't dare raise my voice above a whisper, but I asked Saito-san, who was walking near me.
敵が確実にいる場所、ハマグリ顧問を目指す。
Hamaguri Gate? You mean where Aizu's main forces is protecting, right?
ハマグリ顧問では激しい戦闘が始まっているだろう。あんたも今のうちに気を引き締めておけ。
Alright. Hijikata-san's fury seemed to rouse the Aizu reserves, who up to this point seemed flustered by the threat of conflict, watching the Shinsengumi march. At the end, they followed the Shinsengumi to the Hamaguri Gate. Before long, we'd arrived. Oh my gosh. The gate was pockmarked with scores of bullets, and everywhere dead and dying soldiers littered the ground. The acrid stink of firearms hung in the air. Even though I tried to prepare myself mentally for what lay before me, my heart shattered from the traces of war occurring ahead. The enemy, however, was nowhere to be seen. We had arrived too late. The battle was already over. After a moment of stunned silence, several of our men were dispatched by Hijikata-san to determine what happened. Then Kondo-san sighed.
しかし天使様の御所に討ち入るなど長州は一体何を考えているのだ。
やっていることがよくわからんね。長州は尊王派のはずなんだがな。
Kondo-san simply nodded. The Choshu defined themselves as among those who revered the emperor, yet they attack his home? It didn't make sense to me either. Nevertheless, the damage was done. I was in the middle of pondering their reasons when Saito-san returned to me.
夜半から朝方にかけてハマグリ顧問へ押しかけた長州勢は会津と薩摩の兵力により退けられた模様。
The forces standing against them were too much for the Choshu, who were forced to retreat. The corner of Hijikata-san's mouth curled into a grin.
薩摩が会津の手助けか。世の中変われば変わるもんだな。あんなに仲が悪かったはずなのにな。いや、長州が共通の敵となっただけか。
The Satsuma and Aizu domains hadn't been on the best of terms. I thought that they had smarted the family domain and allied with the imperial court to expel foreigners. However, I recall my father telling me that they were not much different than the Choshu. Unlike the Choshu, however, they'd gone to war with a foreign force and suffered a devastating loss. Following the defeat, I learned the Satsuma began to reconsider their nationalistic stance. However, these were only rumors, and what had come to pass had yet to be fully determined.
土方さん、公家顧問の方にはまだ長州の奴らが残ってるらしいぜ。
Hijikata-san's expression changed as he considered Harada's words, but before he could open his mouth to speak, Yamazaki-san appeared.
副長、今回の御所襲撃の中心人物らが天王山に撤退しているそうです。
Mount Tenno was located between Kyo and Osaka. Supposedly, they were in the middle of escaping from Fushimi towards Osaka. After learning the report from both Harada and Yamazaki-san, Hijikata-san contemplated deeply. Although Kondo-san was recognized as the formal head of the Shinsengumi, I learned from everyone that all major decisions were defected to Hijikata-san. This was no exception, and I could see all eyes were on him. He was silent for a few moments, and then I saw his mouth curve in a small smile.
てめえら、 今から忙しくなるぞ。原田、隊を率いて公家御門へ向かい、長州の残党どもを追い返せ。
あいよ。
斎藤と山崎は状況の確認を頼む。当初の予定通り、この浜栗御門の守備に当たれ。
承知。はい。
それから大将、あんたには大仕事がある。手間だろうが、会津の上層部に掛け合って、追悼の許可をもらってきてくれ。
長州軍の追悼だな。
天王山に向かった奴ら以外にも敗山兵はいる。商家に押し狩りしながら落ち延びるんだろうよ。追悼するなら俺らも京を離れることになる。その許可をもらいに行けるのはあんただけだ。
The Shinsengumi were entrusted with the protection of Kyo, and if this war was for raiding the Aizu, then they had to do more than just guard the gate. Leaving our post, however, to chase after the Choshu troops meant that we needed permission from the military commissioner, meaning the Aizu.
なるほどな。局長である俺が行けば、きっと守護職も取り合ってくれるだろう。
After what we'd gone through the day before, I didn't imagine Kondo-san's task would be an easy one. Still, if their representative was anyone other than Kondo-san, the Aizu would be unlikely to grant the request, let alone entertain the notion of a meeting.
源さんも守護職邸に行く近藤さんと同行して、大将が暴走しないように見張っておいてくれ。
はいよ、任されました。
Another laugh ran through the soldiers, and Kondo-san's mouth twisted into a wry sort of grin. Perhaps he chose not to deny it because he knew he might go a little crazy.
残りの者は俺と共に天王山へ向かう。それから
He looked directly at me. I wasn't a warrior, nor did I have political ties. Ichigata-san didn't know what to do with me. Suddenly, I felt very much like dead weight.
お前は好きな場所に同行しろ。だが近藤さんについていくのはなしだ。
Alright. Kondo-san was meeting with the leaders of the Aizu. If I joined him, there would be nothing for me. I had many options for what I could do. Hijikata-san would be pursuing the leaders of the Choshu attack towards Tenno Mountain. Sato-san would be staying at Hamaguri Gate to protect it and to gather information. Harada and his men would be going to Kuga Gate to stop the attack on the Imperial Estate. The question was, where would I go? Well, the answer is Hamaguri Gate. I decided to remain at Hamaguri Gate with Saito-san. Before long, the rest of the Shinsengumi was gone, and it was time for us to begin our own mission.
まずは新選組の者として会津の責任者へ挨拶が必要か。
In all the excitement, I completely forgot that the Shinsengumi were ordered to stay with the reserves. Instead, we chosen to march to battle. Sato-san was probably right to try and smooth things over with the Aizu as soon as possible.
よろしければ自分が行きます。上層部も混乱していますから、今回の我々の行動を咎めることもないと思います。
わかった。会津藩の対応は山崎に一任する。問題が生じたなら俺を呼んでくれ。
Yamazaki-san bowed once, then turned on his heel and disappeared. The area near the Hamaguri Gate was filled with warriors. Stretchy. I could see some men from the Aizu domain and perhaps some men from Satsuma as well. They appeared to be arguing over something. We've been looking around the area to get the lay of the land when we sensed something unpleasant and went to investigate. That was when we found the confrontation between the Aizu and the Satsuma. What are they arguing about?
おそらくは手柄の取り合いだろう。愚かなことだ。
Oh. The words were barely out of my mouth when one of the Satsuma men noticed us.
何かと思えば新選組ではないか。こんな者どもまで招集していたとは。やはり会津藩はふぬけばかりだな。浪人の手を借りねば戦うこともできんのか？
What? I could see the faces of the Shinsengumi stiffen, and more than one hand moved towards a sword. Saito-san, however, was as impeccable as implacable as ever.
世まいごとに耳を貸すな。ただ己の務めを果たせ。
He swept his cool gaze slowly over the men, looking each man in the eye. They shifted restlessly, but their hands dropped from their swords.
己薩摩、我が会津を狂すつもりか？
His face was bright red, and his sword shook as he held it at the ready. If something wasn't done soon, that sword was likely to start spilling blood. Before anyone from the Satsuma could respond, a tall man stepped through them and out into the space between the two factions.
なんだ、貴様が相手になるか？
With a yell, the soldier threw himself forward, raising his sword to anticipate a deadly cut. Sato-san dashed forward almost too fast to see and stopped before the charging man.
やめた方がいい。あんたとそのものでは腕が違いすぎる。
池田屋では迷惑をかけましたな。確か東堂という名の青年にお相手いただきましたが、怪我の治りが良くないのであれば加減ができずにすまなかったと伝えてください。
池田屋で平助を倒したのはあんたか。なるほど。それならば合点が行く。
Saito-san had even heard the man's apology. He showed no sign of it.
大方薩摩藩の密偵としてあの夜も長州勢の動きを探っていたのだろう。
The man simply shrugged and tilted his head to the side almost quizzically. Saito-san took a step towards him. The tip of Saito-san's sword was only a hair's breadth from the man's forehead. He drew it so fast I saw no blur of silver as it left the scabbard. Unperturbed, the man glanced down at Saito-san.
あんたは新選組にあだをなした。俺から見れば平助の敵ということになる。
しかし今の私には君たち新選組と戦う理由がありません。
He replied as calmly as if they had been enjoying tea together. Saito-san said nothing and his sword did not move. Was Saito-san really that angry? I would certainly see why he would have been, but this was not the time to settle grudges. Still, he was a tough man to read. What was I to do? Stop him! The stakes were too high. The risk wasn't worth it. I don't think this is a good time to fight. Saito-san kept his guard, but for a moment his eyes met mine, and in them I saw frustration and dejection. I understood how he felt, but the man he faced had hurt Heisuke badly. If they fought, the Shinsengumi wouldn't escape unharmed. He was a monster.
あんたは俺が負けると思っているのか。
I don't doubt your skill. However, I just don't think now is a good time to start something. It's not like I didn't trust Saito-san's swordsmanship, but I felt like he stood no chance against a tall man without risking his life.
戦いの中で生きるも死ぬも刀を刺した日に俺は覚悟を終えている。
Perhaps I should have kept silent. It didn't matter either way, the damage was done. I just didn't want Saito-san to die. I hung my head and heard Saito-san let out an exasperated sigh. Looking none too happy about it, he lowered his sword and sheathed it.
俺とて騒ぎを起こすつもりはない。この場はあんたたちと目的を同じにしているはずだ。だが、侮辱に侮辱を重ねるのであれば、我ら新選組も会津藩も動かざるを得まい。
The tall man from the Satsuma nodded deeply.
こちらが浅はかな言動をしたことは事実。この場にいる薩摩藩を代表して謝罪しよう。
The Satsuma men seemed displeased with how things turned out, but whoever the tall man was, none of them dared to speak out against him. Oh. Perhaps Saito-san had been trying to force an apology from them, I realized. Of course, there was no way for me to be sure. I couldn't imagine what went through his head.
私としてもこの場での戦いは避けたかった。そちらが引いてくれたことに感謝する。
He bowed deeply.
私は天桐久寿と申す者。次には見えるとき、互いが協力関係にあることを祈ろう。
His introduction finished, he turned and walked slowly back through the ranks of the Satsuma, towering above them as he went. Saito-san, you never intended to fight him, did you? There was a short silence. Saito-san looked coiled inside himself, staring in the direction Hamaguri walked towards before speaking.
居合で脅せば容易に引くかと思っていたが、あの者には俺の剣筋が読めていたようだな。
Huh? Saito-san pricked his eye, a sword style that focused on drawing a blade and striking in a single stroke. Hamaguri made no attempt to dodge his blow. How would he have known that Saito-san intended to stop just before the blow landed?
薩摩にも厄介な相手がいるようだ。話の通じる点は救いかもしれんが。
I wasn't sure if Saito-san was talking to me or himself, and before I could ask, he turned and walked away. We returned to the Hamaguri gate to await Yamazaki-san's return, but there was little else to do. After that incident, there were no battles. However, the tension remained unabated. Was it possible for the Satsuma and Aizu to find a common ground and coexist peacefully? It seemed like imagining such a world would be an impossible dream. The Choshu extremists' attempted attack on the imperial estate eventually became to be known as the Hamaguri Rebellion. Although the Shinsengumi were called to action, their efforts were stymied, and they found little in the way of glory. Communication with their superiors was poor at best, and they spent much of the battle waiting with the reserves. When the Shinsengumi finally entered the battle, each man found several strange opponents awaiting them. Chikage Kazuma, who defeated Okita Ikeda, claimed to be from the Satsuma domain during his encounter with Hijikata-san. Kyujo Amagiri, the man who shattered Heisuke's head guard at Ikeda, also claimed membership in the Satsuma. They had also met Kyo Shiranui, who'd fought alongside men from Choshu. Whoever they were, it was clear that they were not allies of the Shinsengumi. Indeed, it seemed they could easily become some of its greatest enemies. If they were to meet in open battle, the casualties would be severe. By the time the battle was over, the commanders of the Choshu attack had been killed in the fighting, or took their own lives. There were some soldiers, however, who escaped, setting Kyo ablaze as they fled. By some terrible misfortune, winds that day blew from the north and fanned the flames, reducing the southern end of the imperial estate to ash. As a result of the Choshu attack, many imperial nationalists were executed. With the Hamaguri rebellion over, the Choshu were branded as traitors for attacking the estate. From then on, they were acknowledged enemies of the court.